Hi there, and welcome to the Curious Collective podcast, conversations designed for the conscious community to bring awareness to those holistic practices to help you live your best life. So tap into the wisdom and knowledge of our guests to heal, transform, and live as your true soulful self. Today with us, we have the gorgeous Klein, founder of nature-based therapy. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kit, and she can introduce herself to you all. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Katie. Hi everyone. My name's Kit, and just want to thank Katie for having me on your podcast. I'm really excited to, have invitations to talk about something that I'm so deeply passionate about, which is nature-based therapy. So, yeah, I'm the founder of nature-based therapy. I've been working, I guess, in the space of social work for about 20 years. That's my background. I'll go back, I'm from Canada originally, a descendant of the Wampanoug people, so I have Native American ancestry. Awesome. And I also have German ancestry on my father's side, and on my mother's side is Irish and Scottish. And I think,
what a combination.
Yeah. I think ancestry is really important to understand who we are and our blueprint and where we come from, and it forms part of, our personality and what's in our genetics and bloodlines. But I can talk more about that as I go into kind of what nature-based therapy is. But yeah, so born in Canada, moved here with my mum and 3 siblings when I was about 8 years of age, just turned 9. And, I think one thing, it was quite an interesting journey because we were actually kidnapped.
Oh, wow.
I had no idea I was coming to Australia. My mum went against court orders. Mum and dad had separated like a year before. And, ended up in Australia, meeting all my Australian family. And I liken myself to, like a flower. I was pretty much uprooted from my environment that I was birthed into, that I was planted into. Which was Canada. And when we first moved to Australia, I moved to Victoria. We lived 4 years in Victoria, and then we moved to the Gold Coast, and we spent all my teenage years in high school up in Queensland. And then I moved back to Melbourne for a little bit because I love Melbourne. And then took off and traveled around the world, lived in different countries in my 20s, lived in Japan, the UK, went back to Canada to live. But what I found within myself, and from being uprooted from such a young age and trying to find my place, was I always found myself drawn to nature. Wherever I was in the world, I always sought out natural environments. And that helped me really connect to a place, to have a sense of connection and a sense of belonging. Even before I met community and people, nature was always something that I connected with first. And now I understand, and through everything that I've been doing, that nature is not separate from us. We are nature. And also that nature is our family. And when we look at Indigenous philosophy, is that, the trees, the waterways, and weeds, rivers and flowers and rocks is our family. It's all living. And so that makes sense to me now. Why? And I think, maybe it's because the Indigenous bloodlines in my body was kind of calling for that to happen, and that I had that instant kind of connection. And so nature has always been something that's very close to me. It's helped me personally. I've gone through some things in my, early childhood, some trauma, and how I overcome that trauma, my coping mechanism for overcoming trauma was to connect to nature. And so when I started working as a counsellor, so my background in social work has mainly been specialising in mental health and drug and alcohol addiction. And so when I was a counsellor, I would be talking to people metaphorically, connecting to nature. So it just innately came in. That's how I understood the world. So when someone would talk to me about something that they'd gone through or sharing a story, I'd liken it and relate it to nature as a metaphor. Okay, so you feel like, your roots were pulled out, or, there's something that's happened, what's happened to your environment, your ecosystem, or also relating back to saying, how would nature respond if this happened in a natural environment? How does nature work? So taking those teachings from the natural world and
what a beautiful
applying
point
them.
of reflection just that one question is, like, how would nature respond? You could work with that so much.
Yeah, and I guess over time I just developed these processes that just came naturally out of me, of allowing people those different ways to connect to nature, whether it's actually in nature or metaphorically through conversations and psychotherapy. But, I worked in community health. I worked in Aboriginal health for about 8 years, and I worked in detoxes, rehabs, different environments. And what I found when I took clients out to nature, whether it was walk and talk in the garden, or whether we went down to the river and ran a program there. I used to run the Stay Strong Sister program for the Aboriginal Health Organisation.
Oh, awesome.
We would always alternate inside 1 week, outside the next week. And I felt people opened up without actually, counselling sessions were happening without them actually being structured. So you might just be walking and without asking how you're going, people just start talking. And then I noticed, well, nature's holding space. This is when I realized nature is the therapist. I'm the facilitator. My job is to come in and develop a relationship between people and the natural world, a reconnect, because if humans and nature, what we're actually doing is reconnecting to our authentic self.
Oh, that's powerful. Yes, we are.
And so if we look at, and then I look at all the mental health diagnosis. Mental health is such a big issue at the moment. I think the current stats at the moment is, 25% of the Australian population.
Too many screens. People never switch off.
Diagnosed with a mental health. And so I like to look deeply at cause and effect. There's always a cause for something. And what is the symptom rising, but actually what's the cause underneath it? And so we're looking at, I start thinking back to humanity and my own Indigenous culture. And, Australia's got the longest living culture in the world, which is Aboriginal culture. There's archaeology up in the Northern Territory, rock art dating back to 80,000 years. Some, they say 120,000 years. And so how can a culture live so well, so sustainable, and stay so healthy over a period of time? What can we learn from other cultures and Eastern cultures? When I traveled in Asia, I look at, what does this community have? They don't have social workers. They don't have psychologists. They have community. And so when we look at what is the cause, I date right back to the Industrial Revolution. And that's when our authenticity dropped. And who are we as a human race? And how do we live? And how do we sustain health? And that disconnect from nature, I believe, is the cause of much mental health today. On a micro level, when we're looking at humans and individuals, and then we look at a macro level, which is really looking at communities, and then a meso, which is really around looking at organizations and politics and government structures and policies that are put in place today that have impacted how we can live. And colonization is when it all started, the colonizing of lands. But then I look back before the colonization of the Western world, what was going on in the colonizer's country? What happened to England? What happened where they need to colonize? And I think we just need to keep peeling the layers.
Peeling the layers resonates.
Around where does it all begin, and then learning from who's doing it well and who's done it well, and then really getting some insight around that. So going back to nature-based therapy and how I developed this is after I had my fourth child. So it was about, I was took maternity leave from my last job. So my last job was actually working as a trainer. So after 20 years of working as a counsellor, I went into training. So I was training for registered training organisations, delivering government content of diploma of mental health, alcohol and other drugs, youth work. And what I found, what I was delivering, I thought, this isn't holistic enough. It's very mainstream. It's very much about diagnosis.
Yeah.
It doesn't
within
look at
the box.
Yeah, it's very much within the box, and it wasn't looking at underlying causes. I'm thinking, I've had 20 years working in this space, but I don't think we're really teaching or prepping people how to really work holistically with people. So when I took the maternity leave from training, I'm thinking, okay, I want to do a job that fits with my values and ethics. I want to be self-employed because I've got 4 children now and I need to work around family life. What do I do? So I went and saw a wellbeing business coach, and I said, this is all the knowledge I've got. So by this stage, I've got a master's in Aboriginal studies. I've got a Bachelor of Arts in Indigenous Studies. That's what I did, my 2 first degrees at uni. I've got diplomas and training and assessment, alcohol and other drugs, mental health, postgraduate studies in mental health, youth work studies, like a diploma of holistic healing. I've got so much knowledge and experience to share. I want to create my own training program. I said, but I've got all this content. How do I do it? And she was wonderful. She put it all into, I spoke to her and she wrote it down as I was talking. And we developed what I now run is the Advanced Accreditation in Nature-Based Therapy, which is aimed at skilling up teachers, health workers, everyone into how do we bring nature-based therapy into practice.
Oh, I love that you're skilling up all these people in these key positions.
Because I can't do one thing. I can't do everything. So I like the ripple effect where you throw the stone in the pond, and now I've got all these amazing people out there starting up their own businesses. So I'm really big with especially women being self-sufficient, having their own income, balancing life. And that's what we can do. I encourage people to go into private practice, delivering nature-based therapy programs.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I've come to where I am now and what I'm doing. And I'm expanding nature-based therapy in other areas as well. But this is kind of, so I finished my Masters of Social Work this year. I finished in about 7 weeks.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And, I'm really interested in green social work practice and, working with people who've gone through grief and loss through natural disasters.
Yeah.
How do we rebuild relationship with nature when nature's been so destructive?
Oh, that's super interesting.
Seeing nature as a healer and not kind of the enemy. And so there's lots of different spaces. Getting into wellness tourism as well. When we take people on tours, let's connect them to the natural world instead of just going on shopping trips and seeing the sights. Well, the sites can be the natural environment. So they're wellness tours because you get to see a different country, right? But you also get to see the beautiful nature
Let's
space.
go off the beaten track a bit and look at
that
things we wouldn't normally look at.
Yeah, so not only do you go away and have a holiday, it's also personal development. So we're doing nature-based therapy processes while you're on holiday.
Oh, that's beautiful.
To come back when you're not stressed as well.
Sort of deepens it too, because I feel like a lot of people go on a holiday, but then they need a holiday from their holiday because they didn't actually unwind or, do the thing.
They're too busy having to see things and photograph things that they're actually not in the present moment.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that nature does. It allows us to be present and be in the present moment. So, yeah, that's kind of how I got to developing what nature-based therapy is. It's part of my own personal experience, but it's also my professional experience too.
And what do you love the most about sort of what you've created and the little ripple effect that's going out into the world? What really lights you up about it?
Yeah, look, I see it as changing the health system and planting seeds to give people choice. I'm really big with empowerment, and I think, and that goes, that aligns with social work ethics and values, and our code of ethics in social work is really about, self-empowerment and self-determination, and allowing people to choose what healthcare they want to use. And so in a way, I see nature therapy, outdoor healthcare as a new healthcare system. And so we look at, and the other thing is, it's interesting, is that I have nature-based therapy registered and recognized as a complementary therapy. So I'm registered with the International Institute of Complementary Therapies as a training provider and as a full member. So when students do my training course, they also will become members of IICT so they can practice and get practitioner insurance. But when we look at healthcare and we label it as a complementary therapy, there's somewhat a hierarchy in the healthcare system that says it's complementary. So you complement it, but you still have to bring it into our system. And so what my bigger vision is, that why does it have to be complementary? So I changed that kind of whole framework, and it's like nature-based therapy is a therapy. But, other therapies, so cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, narrative therapy, they're complementary to nature-based therapy.
It's the overarching.
Yeah, so let's shift and change. And this is the healthcare system that Indigenous peoples have been living for thousands of years, is nature-based. And it's preventative health too. Why do we have to wait to get sick to be able to treat people? So the great thing about nature-based therapy is it's really about, why can't we prescribe nature when we're writing out prescriptions? And they're starting to do this. They're looking at doing this. And I don't know if you've heard of Richard Louvre.
Not yet.
So he's the founder of the Child and Nature Network in America, and which we're a member of as well. So we highly recommend people join that movement because they have wonderful research articles, and they have an abundance of resources where you can learn more. And that's over in America. But he wrote the book Last Child in the Woods. And he also coined the term nature deficit disorder.
Oh.
And he's hoping that the nature deficit disorder will become in the DSM-5 in mental health diagnosis.
Oh, yes. Tell me more about this.
And so what we're looking, and what they're doing over in Scandinavia is, and the GPs are actually doing it, they're prescribing nature. So we're looking at, and we encourage all practitioners to do this, whether you're a psychologist, a mental health clinician, an occupational therapist, or a teacher at the school. Why can't we prescribe nature? 20 minutes of sitting there or walking in nature a day. And encouraging people to do that. And that's all it takes to make a difference, is 20 minutes.
Yeah. I would agree with that. Highly.
It's not a lot of time. And when people say don't have time, well, you actually have time. We all have 24 hours in a day. It's how we prioritize what our commitments and what we do. And it's about making time for that.
I love that. And I wanted to touch back on something you spoke about, the going out on particular land and how the Indigenous have done it for so long. I know recently 3 separate groups of friends from different walks of my life have all been out for a trip to Uluru. It's totally different people, totally different walks of life. All of them have had massive shifts in their life since coming back from that land. So this confirms to me what you're saying about like being in those sacred spaces and working with the energy of those lands.
Absolutely. And we drove up to Uluru maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago with the family. We did a road trip up there. I've been there. That was my second time to Uluru, but it has such a strong energy that you could actually feel its pulse.
Oh, wow.
When I'm in Uluru, I can feel the pulse. the heartbeat that comes out. There's a very strong connection, and it's a very strong healing place. And the Uluru is the head of the snake. So when you look back at Indigenous dreaming stories, and for the Northern Territory, the creator of the Northern Territory is the rainbow serpent. Down here in Victoria, New South Wales, it's Bunjil, the wedge-tailed eagle. But in the Northern Territory, it's the rainbow serpent. And the story is that Uluru is actually the head of the snake. And so when it came down from Southeast Asia, when the world was created, it was all one continent, and then it broke apart and it came down. Thailand and Southeast Asia is actually parts of its tail.
Oh, wow.
And then when it landed and stopped, it stopped right in the heart of what is now Australia. And that's its head resting. And looking back and talking about Australia is that, you know, it's not Australia. It's made up of 600 different Aboriginal countries. Like Europe is made up. So you imagine going in and colonizing Europe. You get rid of France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and you call it all one country. Well, that's what happened here in colonization. And so you can understand the connection to country for all humanity is so important. And it was all lost. And I think, you know, colonization is a massive loss, not just for Indigenous people, but for non-Indigenous people too. We've lost that knowledge. And when my ancestors were colonized in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and that's where they have Thanksgiving. That's where Thanksgiving originated from. Thanksgiving is not a good thing. It's a celebration of colonization. Is that, you know, the displacement and taking off country. And when you're on country, and I don't know if you walk barefoot.
Yes, all the time.
Yeah, and that importance and the healing parts of actual grounding through putting your feet on earth. And when we think about why did man make shoes? To feel more comfortable on his man-made concrete and pavers. And then you look at what lies in the earth is healing and the energy that comes from being connected to the earth. That's, you know, our whole body, our whole energetic system is just not flowing as it should.
Revitalized from the earthing and the time. I know recently I did some nature-based therapy with one of your therapists, and we just did this massive walk, and there was a group of 30 of us, and nearly everyone took their shoes off and did the walk together, and it was just so powerful, and I felt so lifted up throughout the whole day just from that. Felt nice too, because it had just been raining, so you were kind of really carefully planting your feet and watching where your foot went and the rocks and the different colors and
you're more mindful, aren't you? Because it's a sensory experience, and that's what we teach. We teach nature-based mindfulness, and that's a really important practice because it's really about connecting to, this is a big part of what nature-based therapy is. Being in the present moment is really about connecting to your 5 senses. And if I can give, you know, listeners of this podcast a tip to take home, it's, you know, 20 minutes a day in nature. Tap into your sensory system. Sit in nature for 20 minutes and say, what can I smell? What can I taste? What can I touch? What can I hear? What can I see? I usually like people to close their eyes and do the sight one last. Because what you see is different to what you see before you start the sensory experience, because you've heard your environment, because you've smelt your environment and touched your environment and had that, you know, and tasted it, whether you pick up a blade of grass or you're at a river and you kind of scoop up the fresh water, as long as it's a healthy river, that you get into the body. And why this is so important is because then you tap into your 6th sense, which is your intuition. And as a human race, we've lost our intuition. We don't know how to make decisions anymore. Our decisions are made from here, which is usually influenced by other people, what we see in advertisements, and it's not reality, it's not truth.
It's not our truth, yeah.
It's not our authentic truth, yes. And so when we connect to nature, we tap into the present moment through our sensory system, we're getting into our gut brain, which is our second brain. So 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut. And that's our mental health as well.
Mm.
And that's where we need to be so that we can be authentic.
I feel so good. It feels so right. Everything that you're saying, my body's just saying yes. I did have another really pressing question that I want to ask you. From all your world travels, being connected to nature so much, is there somewhere in the world where you have just felt such a connection to the land that you're like, oh, this is my place, or, something that's really moved you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. And as you're asking that question, my memory is kind of scanning all the different places that I've been, and it's, there's a few different places. It's really hard to pinpoint one, because I think each place has something different that it offers, and how it speaks to you, because it has its own ancestors, it has its own history, and it has its own medicine. So when we look at nature as being a medicine, I think each land provides its own medicine based upon its own environment. But there's definitely a few spaces that really stand out for me. And one of them is Tofino, which is on Vancouver Island.
Oh, my friend lives near there.
So it's back home, and we're just starting to branch out in nature-based therapy on Vancouver Island. We start our first face-to-face training over there.
Brilliant.
So I have so our programs are international, and so we have students that study international as well. And so people who've graduated, I'm getting them to set up nature-based therapy training programs in those countries.
Oh, so good.
And one of them is Vancouver Island. So Tofino is on Vancouver Island, and I absolutely love it. It's just, there's a space where there's a tidal river, and where we stayed was a cabin, like a log cabin in a cabin park, and it was right on the river. But there was something so uniquely special about this space that you can't, again, there's no words for it. There's just something about it that you can't put into words, but it's a felt thing. And I remember saying to my partner, I said, can you just take the kids for a couple of hours? I just need to go and be by myself. And I remember just moving over to this space, and I still, I took photos of this place, and I'm going to get them blown up on a canvas and put it on my wall at home. And I just sat there, and I couldn't leave. Like every time I'd say, okay, I better get back, you think about, does the kids need me or something, but it kept pulling me down. And energetically, I just couldn't leave. And it was just like this bolt of energy going through. Even talking about it now, I can feel it in my heart.
Oh, so
there
good.
was something there. And, it's interesting that that's a special place. That's something that really stands out for me. Another place is Thailand. I absolutely love Thailand, and I love being in the space of, whether it's the beaches or up in Chiang Mai, when you go into the hill tribes and just hiking through the forest with your backpack on. And there's just silence. And then there's just footsteps. And again, that place I remember, and also the similar thing happened in Malaysia when I went hiking in Malaysia in Cameron Highlands. It's like nature's holding you. And you're there's just energy that goes through you, that we walked for hours and hours and hours and just didn't get tired.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, but then after we rested and had some dinner with the local community, they cook for you and you stay with them. And you wake up the next morning, and the legs, your quads, it's like, whoa, like hamstring. I couldn't walk. I couldn't move. Like, you could feel the muscles because you're going up and down. You got your backpack on. But even though you couldn't feel the pain while you're walking, the next morning you did. It's like, how on earth am I going to get through the next day? Like but as you start walking through nature, again, it holds you.
Mm.
And the pain dissolves. It's kind of like there's a sense that you leave your physical body.
Oh, wow.
When you're in these spaces.
Yeah.
And that you're kind of in that energetic realm.
It's driving your force, momentum, taking you forward.
Yeah. And we are nature. We're not separate from nature. And, you being an energy worker and me also understanding energy and working with energy through Reiki is that we're more than just our physical body.
Yeah.
And disease starts in the energetic body, in the spirit body. And I think, one of the things we work with in nature-based therapy is a holistic health model. And it's 8 dimensions of wellness. So when someone says, oh, you work with mental health, it's like I work with health. Mental health is just one stream. We have emotional health, physical health, and spiritual health. We have social health. We have financial health, occupational health, and we have environmental health. They're the 8 dimensions. And one of the most important part of health, I believe, is the foundation of all health, is spiritual health. Now, spiritual health is deeply connected to our relationship with nature. Religion is not spiritual health. I must make that clear, that there's a big difference between what religion is and what spirituality is. Religion is a belief system. We're taught by people in a book. It's a teaching from a book. Spirituality is a felt sense. It's a connection to our authentic self, and it's just a knowing. You can't tell anyone where you got that knowledge from. It's not from a book. It's not from. It just is. And that is spirituality. And I feel like the foundation of all disease, whether it manifests as a mental health issue or a physical health issue or emotional health, is spiritual health. And so when we work with people, we really need to get to the core of their spiritual health. And then we have a building block. So once it goes in this order too, spiritual health is at the bottom, and then we have emotional health. Then we have mental health, and then we have physical health. And you'll notice that when people get sick, these are the layers it comes out in.
100%. Yep.
And then we have social health. So if we're not well on those 4 areas, it affects our relationships and our social health. And then it affects our occupational health. That's why we have a lot of people with mental health issues have high unemployment too, because occupational health, if you don't have occupational health, you don't have financial health. And then environmental health. But nothing is linear. Everything in life is circular. So is it environmental health is the foundation? If we're looking in a circle, we start with spiritual, we come around, you have environmental. They go hand in hand. So spirituality is deeply connected to our environment. And nature.
Oh my goodness, I love all of that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And is this sort of information that you're sharing with us on your website?
Yeah, so my website has different pages on there. Like I have a resource page where I sell nature journals and nature reflection cards. And then I have, some information around the workshops that I offer and courses that I do. And we're also branching out into retreats. Retreats for women who've gone through family violence, camps for youth camps, more as a preventative health.
Yeah, I love the idea of preventative in all aspects. So important.
For healthcare workers, I think it's really important that people who work in health and care for other people need respite.
Yes, they do.
And need to self-care. So that's a really big thing for me, is that I facilitate programs for healthcare workers to try and sustain their own health And in that, what we're doing is they're experiencing nature-based therapy processes. So what they experience for their own personal health, they might go back into their workplace. They don't need to do the course because they've experienced it firsthand. Then they can just share that knowledge with the people that they work with, whether it's colleagues or whether it's with their clients.
It would weave itself beautifully through everywhere that it needs to, just like a vine in the forest makes its way to wherever it needs to.
Absolutely. And when you talk about weaving, look at basket weaving, look at spiders and how they weave webs.
Oh, the beautiful intricacy of a web, yes.
So nature teaches us that how we should be working and living should be all about weaving. And that goes against the capitalist system because that's about I, mine, me. Whereas weaving is about us as, togetherness.
I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much for absolutely everything you have shared with us today. If anyone was really interested in, diving further into nature-based therapy and maybe, really visiting it for themselves here in the heart, what key advice would you have for them before we part ways?
Yeah, look, and as I mentioned before, my advice is just to be in nature, take your shoes off, spend 20 minutes, whether it's walking or just sitting on the ground, and also putting your palms down.
Yeah.
Just being in nature and tuning into your senses and just really being in that moment, in that present moment. And the more you do that, the more you practice that, it just becomes innately natural that you will just pick nature out and tune into nature automatically. You reconnect to yourself. Like I find even when I'm driving in the car, the first thing I notice are trees on the side of the road or a bird that's flying past. Like the more you be it and practice it, you tune in. I walk into Melbourne. The first thing I notice in Melbourne is not the traffic and the people.
The trees.
It's the trees and the birds that circle around.
And my kids are doing it too now because I resonate with you deeply. I do the same. And now, even on the way to school this morning, my youngest was like, "Oh, look at that tree. It's like red with spots on it." I'm like, "Oh, I love it."
And then you talk about uniqueness about the tree, and then you can relate that back to the uniqueness of every child. And having those conversations, like you don't have to be like everyone else. When you go out into the forest, is there a tree that ever looks the same? Yes, they're both trees, but when you look deeply at them and you connect with them, they're all different shapes, they're all different sizes, and they all have different medicines, just like humans.
I love that so much. That last part is so powerful to really reflect on. Thank you so much for all of that. And I might actually get you back for a part 2 at some stage. I think we've got a lot more to talk about. Thank you so much for your time, Kit, and I'm sure the listeners have enjoyed every minute.
Thank you.
See you next time.